Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read a lightly edited version of Pioneer Work in Opening the Medical Profession to Women, Autobiographical Sketches by Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, published in 1895. The book will be read in order, so if you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 2, Episode 26. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you would like to recommend a text, please email us at explorationdreamland, all one word, at gmail.com. You can also find our episodes on YouTube. Please subscribe or follow and review us wherever you find us. Your actions will help others find us too. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. It was during these first early years that, not being able to continue the expense of good consultation rooms, I determined to buy a house. A friend lent me the necessary money at fair interest, and a house in a good situation in 15th Street was selected. This transaction proved a very material assistance in many different ways and enabled me to form the home center which is so necessary to the most efficient work. In later years also, this early experience helped me to realize more fully the fundamental importance of the great land question, or a stake in the soil, as well as other weighty social problems. The difficulties and trials encountered at this early period were severe. Ill-natured gossip, as well as insolent anonymous letters, came to me. Although I have never met with any serious difficulties in attending to my practice at all hours of the night, yet unpleasant annoyances from unprincipled men were not infrequent. Some well-dressed man would walk by my side on Broadway, saying in a low voice, "Turn down Duane Street to the right." Or, whilst waiting for a horse car at midnight by the City Hall, a policeman would try to take my hand, or a group of late revelers would shout across the street, "See that lone woman walking like mad." But with common sense, self-reliance, and attention to the work in hand, any woman can pursue the medical calling without risk. The heat of a New York summer also was at this time very trying to an English constitution. A letter to my sister in 1853 exclaims, "Oh dear, it is so hot I can hardly write. I was called this morning to Flushing to see a sick child, and then attended my dispensary, the thermometer varying from 86 to 90 in the house, and it stood at 102 in some rooms downtown. Walk as deliberately as I would, it made my brain seem too large for my head. Flushing reminded me of the Sahara. It lay breathless under a cloudless sky, leaden with haze." In relation to mischievous gossip, it is written, "These malicious stories are painful to me, for I am woman as well as physician. and both natures are wounded by these falsehoods. Ah, I am glad I, and not another, have to bear this pioneer work. I understand now why this life has never been lived before. It is hard, with no support but a high purpose, to live against every species of social opposition. I should like a little fun now and then. Life is altogether too sober. The utter loneliness of life became intolerable, and in October of 1854, I took a little orphan girl from the great emigrant depot of Randall's Island to live with me. This congenial child I finally adopted. The wisdom of such adoption is abundantly shown by an entry in my journal 2 years later, written on my birthday. On this bright Sunday morning, I feel full of hope and strength for the future. Kitty plays beside me with her doll. She has just given me a candy basket, purchased with a penny she had earned, full of delight in Doctor's birthday. Who will ever guess the restorative support which that poor little orphan has been to me? When I took her to live with me, she was about 7½ years old. I desperately needed the change of thought she compelled me to give her. It was a dark time, and she did me good. Her genial, loyal temperament suited me. Now I look forward with much hope to the coming events of this year. An amusing circumstance relating to this child is worth recording. She had always been accustomed to call me doctor. On one occasion she was present during the visit of a friendly physician. After he was gone, she came to me with a very puzzled face, exclaiming, "Doctor, how very odd it is to hear a man called doctor." In December of 1855, I gave a first drawing-room address on the medical education of women. In this address, which was afterwards printed, it was shown that the movement was only a revival of work in which women had always been engaged, but that it was a revival in an advanced form, suited to the age and to the enlarging capabilities of women. The clear perception of the providential call to women to take their full share in human progress has always led us to insist upon a full and identical medical education for our students. From the beginning in America, and later on in England, we have always refused to be tempted by the specious offers urged upon us to be satisfied with partial or specialized instruction. On the occasion of this address, an appeal was made for assistance in collecting funds for the growth of the dispensary and the gradual formation of a hospital as indispensable for the accomplishment of the work. A committee of 3 ladies was appointed at this drawing-room meeting for the purpose of beginning the difficult work of collecting a permanent fund. In 1854, my sister, Dr. Emily Blackwell, who had graduated with honor at the Medical College of Cleveland, Ohio, was pursuing her studies in Europe. There, she gained invaluable surgical experience from having been generously received as assistant by Sir James Simpson in his extensive practice in female diseases. The genial character of this well-known physician was shown not only by his cordial reception of Dr. Emily as pupil and assistant, but by an amusing incident which occurred whilst his consulting rooms were filled by a waiting assembly of aristocratic patients. My sister, being a classical scholar, was often employed by the doctor in making translations or extracts for him. On one occasion, whilst thus engaged in the farthest room of the suite, he called in a low voice, "Dr. Blackwell." Then, a little louder, "Dr. Blackwell." and when the attention of all his patients was thus aroused, he called in a voice loud enough for my sister to hear, "Dr. Blackwell." And then, from the corner of his eye, and with intense amusement, he watched the varied expressions of surprise and dismay depicted on the countenances of his distinguished patients as they saw the approach along the suite of rooms of a lady who thus answered the summons. The following letters to my medical sister refer to this period of the work. New York, May 12. I need not tell you with what interest and hope I look forward to your Edinburgh news. The prospect is very good. One of the most difficult points I have to contend with here is the entire absence of medical sympathy. The medical solitude is really awful at times. I should thankfully turn to any educated woman if I could find one. Pray bear in mind to collect all the information you can about maternity, the relation of the sexes, and kindred subjects. We have a vast field to work in this direction, for reliable information is desperately needed in the world on these topics. I feel as if it were peculiarly our duty to meet this want. There is much vain thought given to these matters here. An active set of people are making desperate efforts to spread their detestable doctrines of free love under scientific guise, placing agents with the advertisements of their books worded in the most specious and attractive manner at the doors of the conventions now being held here. On the other hand, equally misleading publications are brought out in opposition. Such teaching is utterly superficial and untrustworthy, and consequently misleading. We want facts, scientifically accurate observations, past and present, on all that bears on these matters. You remember the pamphlet sent me by Dr. Sims of Alabama. He is now here, determined to establish a hospital for the special treatment of women's diseases. He is enlisting much support and will, I think, succeed. He seems to be in favor of women studying medicine. I think I shall help him in any way I can. I have, at last, found a student in whom I can take a great deal of interest. Marie Zakshevska, a German, about 26. Dr. Schmidt, the head of the Berlin midwifery department, discovered her talent, advised her to study, and finally appointed her as chief midwife in the hospital under him. There she taught classes of about 150 women and 50 young men, and proved herself most capable. When Dr. Schmidt died, the American minister advised her to come to New York, but here the German doctors wanted her to become a nurse. In desperation, she consulted the Home for the Friendless, where they advised her to come to me. There is true stuff in her, and I shall do my best to bring it out. She must obtain a medical degree. July 24. Don't be discouraged. There is no doubt about our losing many opportunities because of our sex. But you must also bear in mind the disadvantages all students labor under, unless in exceptional cases. Crowded together in masses, they only see at a distance the most interesting cases. The complete study is reserved for the physician or his constant attendant. I remember expressing my impatience while in the maternité at the restrictive rules there, and M. Blot said, "What you wish for are only enjoyed by the few who occupy the most favored positions." Yet I gained, in spite of all difficulties, a great deal, and in accelerating ratio the longer I stayed. I remember that it seemed to me I had gained more in my 4th month at the maternité than in the whole 3 preceding ones. Now, I say this because I don't want you to overestimate the worth of pantaloons. Disguise in France or elsewhere would by no means give you all you need. If the disguise were complete, you would just be reduced to the level of the common poor student, and would be, I think, quite disappointed. It needs also that influential men should take an interest in you and give you chances quite beyond the ordinary run. I know that at St. Bartholomew's I would not have exchanged my position for that of the simple student, though I would gladly for the clinical clerk or intern's position. Now you can do nothing in France except by special medical influence. Your time is limited, and you cannot wait for examinations and promotions as an ordinary student. You ask me what I did, and what can be done as a lady. I entered the maternité, dissected at l'École des Beaux-Arts alone, employed a répétiteur who drilled me in anatomy and smuggled me into the dead house of La Charité at great risk of detection, where I operated on the cadaver. I once made the rounds of his wards in the Hôtel Dieu with Roux, heard his lectures, and saw his operations. I attended lectures on medical generalities at the College of France and Jardin des Plantes. I believe that was all in the way of Parisian study. I applied to Davin, Director General of the hospitals, for permission to follow the physicians, refused. Applied to Dubois and Trousseau to attend lectures at the École des Médecins, refused. Trousseau advising me to disguise. You see, I had no introductions, no experience. I went into the maternité soon after going to France and came out with a sad accident, not inclined to renew the battle, not well knowing how, and with a promising chance opened to me in London. I should do differently now. I should get the most influential introduction I could. I should tell them just what I wanted, find which hospitals would be most suited to my purpose, and if by putting on disguise I could get either an assistant's post or good visiting privilege, I would put it on. I don't believe it would be a disguise at all to those you were thrown with, but it would be a protection if advised by intelligent men, and would make them free to help you. I should avoid crowds, because you gain nothing in them. I don't think either the lectures at l'École des Médecins or the great hospital visits, where from 1 to 500 students follow, would be of any use. It is in a more private and intimate way, and in hospitals where many students do not go, that you might gain. I know no one in a position to give you more valuable letters than Dr. Simpson, if he is disposed to. You ask me what I saw at the maternité, but I find my notes imperfect. I have only noted down 9 versions, etc., but I think the most important thing in the maternité is the drilling in the more ordinary labors, for only where the finger is thoroughly trained can you detect varieties. The cases you send me are very interesting, and I am very glad you have made such full notes, as they will be useful hints in future solitary practice. Don't be in a hurry to leave Dr. S., for I fear you will nowhere else find a good drilling in that department. I shall see how far I can make your notes available from time to time in my own practice. With regard to my own clientele, I shall have advanced $50 over last year, slow progress, but still satisfactory, as it is reliable practice, not capricious success. Only think, The thermometer has been up to 102 in some of the rooms downtown. We have had 3 days' spells this July that seem to me a little beyond anything I have ever had to endure. November 13. I shall be very anxious to know what you do in Paris. I almost doubt the propriety of your entering the maternity, or rather, I hope that the necessity may be obviated by your finding other openings. That Dubois is somewhat of an old fox, and will, I presume, at once advise your entrance to get rid of any responsibility. But I would not think of doing so until I had seen all the others and tried for better openings. I think you could get sufficient midwifery at the École des Médecins, where the midwives have the night cases. The association would be unpleasant from the character of the women, but it would leave you your freedom. You have done excellently in Edinburgh, and nothing could be more satisfactory than the way you leave. I think, however, before going to Paris, you had certainly better see Dr. Oldham of Guy's. He is disposed to be friendly, and if he chose, might greatly help you. It would seem as if it would be well to pursue your English studies before the Parisian. If you could follow Doctors Burrows and Bailey in medicine at St. Bartholomew's and Oldham at Guy's, you would do well. I am very glad you are collecting special medical statistics. We shall find them very serviceable in lecture or pamphlet form. It will be necessary next year to make an active effort for the dispensary, and I think a few lectures would be very important. My conviction becomes constantly stronger that you will return, and my plans for the future all involve that fact. A pleasant circumstance occurred to my German, Dr. Zakshevska. I arranged a Cleveland course for her, and she entered 2 weeks ago. She met a very friendly reception, and found that Dr. Kirkland is in correspondence with Professor Müller of Berlin, and he had mentioned her in some of his letters in such high terms that the faculty told her if she would qualify herself for examination in surgery and chemistry and write an English thesis, that they would graduate her at the end of this term. Of course, she is studying with might and main, and will, I have no doubt, succeed, so we may reckon on a little group of 3 next year. That will be quite encouraging. November 27. I cannot but feel glad that you rejected the urgent persuasions to go to the Crimea. I cannot say what going to Russia might have done for you in English reputation, but for America it would have been sheer waste of time. I am constantly surprised to see what an entire non-conductor of enthusiasm the ocean is, and reputation in England, except in very rare cases, is utterly unavailing here. The radical differences in national character and the eager youthful nature of this people quite prevent full sympathetic transmission of feeling and recognition of older experience. I am vexed to think how completely unavailing your Scotch studies will be in the puffing line, but make yourself really strong, and we will turn them to the best account in another and a better way. Don't forget to bring a full earnest testimonial from Simpson and from others as you progress. I'm delighted you are going to Malvern. Oh, those breezy uplands of our native isle! Is anything in nature so delicious as their air and freedom? My ride with Kay over the Welsh hills stands alone in my memory, and my slide with Howie down Malvern makes my mouth water. January 23, 1855. Your letter came yesterday. giving me an account of M's relapse and the many anxieties you have suffered lately. I confess to feeling an intense anxiety about her, notwithstanding the hope conveyed in your letter, and I shall look to the coming of the postman with dread for the next 3 weeks, lest he should bring me evil news. You have been pursuing your studies in a way we did not anticipate the last 8 weeks, but very surely it is not lost time. The responsibilities of such a case will strengthen you for every future case, and as an illustration of or commentary on Dr. S.'s practice, I don't think it will be lost to you. The whole case from beginning to end strikes me as a horrid barbarism, but at the same time I fully allow that it is the way to make a reputation. M's death would be little to him. The responsibility would be staved off in a dozen different ways, and if she succeeded in her object, no end to the trumpeting of his praise. I see every day that it is the heroic, self-reliant, and actively self-imposing practitioner that excites a sensation and reputation. The rational and conscientious physician is not the famous one. I have just heard one piece of news which decidedly indicates progress and which is peculiarly cheering to me, because I am persuaded that I have been chiefly instrumental in it. The New York hospital has opened its doors to women this winter. There is now a class of 8 women, all pupils from Dr. Troll's Hydropathic Institute, who attend regularly the clinical visits and lectures in the amphitheater with all the other students. The matter was discussed in full board, Trimble and Collins both advocating, and it was resolved to make the experiment. Doctors Smith, Buck, and Watson, the then attending physicians, being present and consenting, quite concurring in the principle, and only pleading the embarrassment they should themselves occasionally feel. Mr. Trimble assured them they would soon conquer their bashfulness. Thus far, it seems, there has been no difficulty. I consider the matter so important that I intend at once to take the hospital ticket and watch the experiment in person as closely as I can. I only wish the girls came from other than quack auspices. Do the knockings prevail at all in England? It is astonishing how they increase here. Judge Edmonds has published 2 large volumes which are astonishing, I think, as a record of self-deception or credulity. The promoters hold public discussions in the Tabernacle, publish endless literature, and have hired a large house in Broadway at $2,200 and Katie Fox at a salary of $1,200 per annum to give free demonstrations to whoever wishes to investigate the truth of this wonderful new revelation. I attended one of these free sittings lately at Mrs. B.'s invitation. It was a curious physical phenomenon to my mind of the animal magnetism order. My few questions were all answered wrong, but Mrs. B. and many others asked similar questions, the answers of which she knew, and they were answered promptly and correctly. Everyone who queried with eager temperament got prompt and correct replies, independent of Katie Fox's volition. It was odd, but quite disgusting in the view taken of it as an ultra-mundane exhibition. Establishment of a hospital. In 1856, my working powers were more than doubled by the arrival of my sister, Dr. Emily Blackwell, who became henceforth my partner and able co-worker. Dr. Maria E. Zakshevska also joined us as soon as she had graduated at Cleveland, and became for some years before her removal to Boston our active and valued assistant in the New York work. The refreshing Sunday walks taken with this warm-hearted doctor when, crossing the bay by an early ferry boat, we walked for hours in the beautiful environs of Hoboken or Staten Island, will always remain as a pleasant background to the affectionate friendship which still continues. Thus reinforced, an advanced step was made in 1857 by the renting of a house, number 64 Bleecker Street, which we fitted up for a hospital where both patients and young assistant physicians could be received. This institution, under the name of the New York Infirmary for Women and Children, was formally opened in the May of this year by a public meeting in which the Reverend Henry Ward Beecher, Dr. Elder of Philadelphia, and the Reverend Dr. Tyng, Jr., warmly supported the movement. In this institution, Dr. Zakshevska accepted the post of resident physician, Dr. Emily becoming chiefly responsible for the surgical practice. This first attempt to establish a hospital conducted entirely by women excited much opposition. At that date, although college instruction was being given to women students in some places, no hospital was anywhere available either for practical instruction or the exercise of the woman physician's skill. To supply the need had become a matter of urgent importance. Our difficulties are thus noted in the annual report for 1864. Quote, "But to this step, the establishment of a hospital, a host of objections were raised by those whom the early friends of the institution attempted to interest in their effort. They were told that no one would let a house for the purpose, that female doctors would be looked upon with so much suspicion that the police would interfere, that if deaths occurred, their death certificates would not be recognized, that they would be resorted to by classes and persons whom it would be an insult to be called upon to deal with, that without men as resident physicians they would not be able to control the patients, that if any accident occurred, not only the medical profession, but the public would blame the trustees for supporting such an undertaking, and finally, that they would never be able to collect money enough for so unpopular an effort." End quote. Through a cloud of discouragement and distrust, the little institution steadily worked its way, its few friends holding to it the more firmly for the difficulties it experienced. The practice of the infirmary, both medical and surgical, was conducted entirely by women, but a board of consulting physicians, men of high standing in the profession, gave it the sanction of their names: Dr. Valentine Mott, Dr. John Watson, Drs. Willard Parker, R. S. Kissam, Isaac E. Taylor, and George P. Kamen were the earliest medical friends of the infirmary. The pecuniary support of this institution, in addition to the medical responsibility involved in its conduct, was no small burden. For many years, its annual income rested mainly on our exertions. A bazaar was held in its behalf for 7 years in succession. Lectures, concerts, and every other available means of collecting funds were resorted to. At one time, Fanny Kemble was giving a series of Shakespearean readings in New York, and often rendered generous help to benevolent institutions by the use of her great talent. We hoped that she might aid our struggling infirmary by giving a public reading in its behalf, so on one occasion, I called with our fellow worker, Dr. Zakshevska, at the hotel where she was staying to prefer our request. She received us courteously, listened with kindness to an explanation of the object of our visit and of the needs of the infirmary. But when she heard that the physicians of the institution were women, she sprang up to her full height, turned her flashing eyes upon us, and with the deepest tragic tones of her magnificent voice exclaimed, "Trust a woman as a doctor? Never!" The thunderclap which thus smote us in the New York hotel brought back amusingly to my mind the scene at Brighton, when the parlor door suddenly opened and a brilliant figure in stage costume advanced to the gentle, refined Lady Byron with an impassioned quotation from Julius Caesar. The contrast between two women's natures was so remarkable. The necessity, however, of a separate hospital for the general training of women students had by this time been recognized. Experience both at the New York hospital and at the large Bellevue hospital, where classes of imperfectly trained women had failed to maintain their ground, proved that a special woman's center was needed, not only as affording them practical instruction, but for the purpose of testing the capacity and tact of the students themselves, before admitting them to walk the general hospitals where male students were admitted. The New York Infirmary for Women therefore gradually enlisted the active help of enlightened men and women. We were much encouraged by the kindly contributions of articles for our annual bazaars from English friends, and a generous-hearted French lady, Madame Trelat, who felt much interest in the new medical movement, sent a donation to the funds of the hospital. The continued interest of English friends is shown by our correspondence. To Lady Noel Byron, New York, December 27, 1857. My dear friend, your kind interest in our hospital cheers me. Very few persons understand the soul of this work, or the absolute necessity which lies upon us to live out the ideal life to the utmost of our power. My work is undoubtedly for the few. It is labor in the interlinkings of humanity, and is necessarily difficult of appreciation by the mass of people, and is very slow in gaining their esteem. It has been a most toilsome lesson to translate my thought into the common language of life. I labor at this translation perpetually, and still remain too often incomprehensible. I will not degrade the central thought of this work, but I seek in every way to accommodate it wisely to the practical common-sense feeling of the people. My sister is a noble helper, and we shall stand, I trust, shoulder to shoulder through many years of active service. I shall have the pleasure of soon forwarding to you a report of our last year's proceedings. This will give the simple facts of our hospital life. Allow me to remain, with very true affection, your friend, Elizabeth Blackwell, 79 East 15th Street. Chapter 6. England Revisited, 1858. The 10 years during which this pioneer medical work had been steadily carried on had thus firmly established the new departure as a useful innovation in the United States. The reform was at that time steadily growing, not only in New York, but also in Philadelphia and Boston, under the guidance of able bodies of women. We were now desirous of learning what openings existed in England for the entrance of women into the medical profession. We knew that much interest had been felt there in the progress of the American work, and we had been urged by friends in Europe to give some account of it. It was determined, therefore, in August 1858, that I should again revisit my native land and urge the importance of this medical work. Soon after my arrival in Europe, I took the occasion of a visit made to a sister in Paris to prepare carefully a series of 3 addresses to be delivered in England, showing what was being done in medicine by women in the United States and the reasons for that work. The first of these addresses was on the value of physiological knowledge to women, the second on the value of medical knowledge, and the third on the practical aspect of the work as established in America and its adaptability to England. Whilst engaged in the preparation of the lectures, I entered into relations with the large-hearted Countess de Noailles, whose devotion to sanitary reform and generous support of benevolent enterprises were equally remarkable. This lady was very desirous that a country sanatorium for women should be established in England or France, being firmly convinced that hygienic conditions in their fullest application were the chief necessity in the successful treatment of special diseases. This lady wrote to an old friend in Paris, quote, "I wish to direct all my efforts to this object. Let me know as soon as possible what it would cost to establish a small hospital for women and children, either in France or England, under Miss Blackwell's direction." End quote. She also requested one of her noble French relatives to make my acquaintance. The interview is thus described in a letter to Dr. Emily in New York. Paris, 1858. Yesterday I saw Madame by appointment at her own house. To me she seemed a stout, black-eyed French woman of 45, cordial in manner, speaking English well, and knowing as much of England and Anglo-Saxon nature as a Frenchwoman ever can know. We conversed energetically for 2 hours. She is seriously interested in the entrance of women into the medical profession, a wish founded in her case on the moral degradation which she has observed amongst her own acquaintance from the practice of being treated by men in female complaints. The fact which most struck her in all I told her was your amputating a breast. In this she actually triumphed. Her face became radiant with the intense satisfaction of the thing, for it proved to her by a fact what she wanted to believe, but could only accept intellectually from all my reasons: the necessity of letting the midwife drop, and striking unflinchingly for the highest position. This one fact, worth to this sort of nature a host of arguments, gave her real faith in the physician. She opened freely her objections, or rather difficulties, and I met them one after another. And this difference I observed in the encounter with the cultivated European nature. When I gave her a reason, she understood it and accepted it. It did not go in at one ear and out at the other, as with more frivolous people. There is some soil or substance you can plant in this stouter nature. As years ago with Lady Byron, so with this lady, it was of some use talking to her. She propounded, of course, foolish as well as serious ideas. Thus she thought that women physicians should never marry. She also would be shocked to see me with a garland on my head dancing in a ballroom, and she thought they should be devoted, like the Sisters of Charity, etc. I combated her idea of abnegation for a while, and put in a feeler to see if she could take in a higher notion, but finding it was impossible, I at once ceased the attempt, and allowed her to hold to her own highest idea, which I could see was tinged by her French nature. Of course, it wearied me a little, and I wanted after a while to expand my lungs and breathe freely, but I certainly made a strong impression upon her. She thanked me and shook my hand again and again at parting, and said that she should not think of letting this be our last interview, and she should write to Madame de Noailles the very next day. She had asked me previously if I was resolved in any case to go back to America, and I had told her no, but described at the same time the excellent beginning we had made there. I feel convinced that I shall have some proposition in relation to my, or rather our, establishment in London. What, then, ought we to say should such an offer arise? I will accept nothing that is not offered to us both. On that I am quite determined. We cannot separate in practice. Paris, November 1858. Preparing my lectures is a troublesome business. My first one would not do. It was so much more adapted to an American than an English audience. I wanted also quantities of facts that I did not know how to get. But I have now rewritten 21 pages. I have written it with pleasure, though very slowly, and I am really surprised to find how very slowly I write. I can only write when I feel fresh in the morning, sometimes only a page, sometimes none. I will not force it when I don't feel fresh, but I shall take whatever time is necessary to do the work well, for it is really important. It was during this visit that I had the privilege of becoming personally acquainted with Dr. Trelat, the head of La Salpêtrière, and his admirable wife, who remained steadfast friends through life. I visited them at La Salpêtrière, that large asylum for infirm women, over which Dr. Trelat presided with truly paternal care. La Salpêtrière was not then a great school of experimentation, but a benevolent refuge, where the well-being and kindly protection of its inmates formed the primary object of the director. The following letters are descriptive of this time. To Lady Byron, Paris, December 30, 1858. 160 Rue Saint-Dominique. My dear and venerated friend, I received your letter yesterday. The mere chance of being in any way useful to the valuable friend you refer to is reason sufficient for a short return at once to England. So I have made my arrangements to reach London on Monday evening, January 3. I have heard with great pleasure of an invitation to lecture in London, which I will acknowledge when I receive it. I shall be glad of an opportunity of laying very important considerations before my fellow countrywomen, but I cannot lecture just at present. I find that I must first go to Italy, for reasons which I will explain when we meet. Therefore it is too soon to engage rooms at present, for which kind offer I sincerely thank you. My chief object in making this hurried visit of a few days is to see Miss Nightingale and a few valued friends, amongst whom I hope I may reckon yourself. I shall therefore remain quietly at my cousin's, No. 73 Gloucester Terrace, Hyde Park, not attempting to enter into society. To Dr. Emily Blackwell, London, February 1859. I have just returned from an interview with Miss Nightingale at Malvern in relation to a school for nurses which she wishes to establish, and I start tomorrow for France en route for Menton. My old friend's health is fading from the pressure of mental labor. I cannot go into the details of her last 5 years now, but the labor has been and is immense. I think I have never known a woman labor as she has done. It is a most remarkable experience. She indeed deserves the name of a worker. Of course, we conversed very earnestly about the nursing plan in which she wished to interest me. She says that for 6 months she shall be utterly unable to give any thought to the fund work, and wants me meanwhile to observe English life very carefully and make up my mind as to whether I can give up America, which she thinks a very serious matter. Unfortunately, she does not think private practice possible in connection with her plan. If so, it would be impossible for us to help her. She thinks her own health will never permit her to carry out her plan herself, and I much fear she is right in this belief. After a short visit to the Riviera to confer with the Countess de Noailles about her proposed sanitarium for women, I returned to London. There, my warm friends, the Mrs. Lee Smith, supported by their generous-hearted father, and Miss Bessie Rayner Parkes, interested themselves actively in preparing for the first delivery of my lectures. The Marylebone Hall was secured. Our young friends brought up primroses and other lovely flowers and green wreaths from Hastings to ornament the reading desk, and warmly supported me by their ardent sympathy. On March 2, 1859, the first lecture was given to a very intelligent and appreciative audience, whose interest was warmly enlisted. I well remember the tears rolling down the benevolent face of Miss Anna Goldsmith, who sat immediately in front of me. But the most important listener was the bright, intelligent young lady whose interest in the study of medicine was then aroused, Miss Elizabeth Garrett, who became the pioneer of the medical movement in England, and who, as Mrs. Garrett Anderson, lives to see the great success of her difficult and brave work. These addresses were afterwards given in Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool, Mr. Bracebridge kindly making arrangements for them in Birmingham and the Reverend W. H. Channing in Liverpool. The interest thus excited in London led to some effort being made to commence in England similar work to that being done in America. A meeting of ladies was held at the St. John's Wood residence of Mrs. Peter Taylor, over which Mr. William Shane presided. A committee was formed to consider the subject, and encouraged by the offer of help made by the Countess de Noailles, a circular was prepared stating the object to be accomplished and inviting support. This circular, which was revised by Dr. Mayo, Lady Byron, Mr. Shane, and the Honourable Russell Gurney, was gradually signed by a large number of influential ladies. The circular states, "Proposed Hospital for the Treatment of the Special Diseases of Women. The lectures recently delivered by Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell at the Marylebone Literary Institution have produced in the minds of the ladies who heard them a strong conviction of the necessity for a more general diffusion of hygienic knowledge among women, and have led to a proposition to found a hospital for a class of diseases, the ordinary treatment of which too frequently involves much avoidable moral suffering, to be placed under the direction of competent women physicians in connection with a board of consulting physicians and surgeons. A lady, impressed with the want of such an institution, and convinced of the value of hygienic knowledge in the treatment and prevention of female diseases, has already promised £1,000 towards the hospital and offers £5,000 more for the endowment of a sanitary professorship in connection with it, provided a sufficient sum be raised by donation to place the institution on a permanent basis. In order to secure the advantages of this offer, it is proposed to raise and invest an additional sum of not less than £10,000 for the purpose of securing and furnishing a suitable house and forming the nucleus of a permanent hospital endowment, and also to collect an annual subscription list of not less than £500 to assist in defraying the current expenses of the hospital. The ladies whose names are appended to this statement have signified their cordial concurrence in the proposal to establish such an institution, and their desire to aid it in any way that may be within their power. Contributions will be received by Messrs. Williams, Deacon and Company, Bankers, 20 Birchin Lane, E.C. Any communications may be addressed to Miss Brasher, Honorable Secretary, 73 Gloucester Terrace, Hyde Park, W. Messrs. Bracebridge, the Honorable Russell Gurney, Q.C., and the Honorable W. Cowper accepted the posts of trustees, and 66 names of well-known ladies were gradually added to the circular. Stay tuned for the next segment from Pioneer Work in Opening the Medical Profession to Women by Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Van Zaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg for helping me find this and many other interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.